All right, we are talking about Open Legend. So what are we talking about in terms of Open Legend? Well, once again, for those that are new here, I'm trying to make an RPG. I love them. My tenets are the things above. That's what I'm trying to build in an RPG. And we're going through different RPGs and board games and figuring out what are their influences, what are things that we could rip off or use or borrow in our system. And there's a lot of cool games out there, and so I'm going one by one and saying what I like about them. Open Legend is a really cool D20 based system that was a Kickstarter on. I found it, but it has an SRD that you can access on the web. The first thing I love about it is its attribute list. Oh, and by the way, for those that are new, I can't spell, so deal with it. So the attribute list is really cool because I'm just going to copy and paste it. I have it written out over here. It is a laundry list of awesome stuff, and it does something a little different than your standard sort of abilities, where in D&D or other games, the 13th Age, you have strength, dex, con, charisma, wisdom, intelligence. Some of the problems with those is that some of those stats can become god stats. I think that in 5e, everyone knows that dex is pretty darn powerful because it can be your plus to attack, plus to damage, your AC, your sneaking, your acrobatic. You can use it for a lot of stuff. And so in this system, they do things a little differently. So in essence, these are your physical attributes: agility, fortitude, and might. These are your mental attributes. So they're breaking it apart. Learning, logic, perception, this should be 2. Learning, logic, perception, and will. And then these are sort of your social aspects: deception, persuasion, and presence. And then these are all sort of metaphysical or energy-based magical attributes. And what happens in the system is this is a system where they use dice to represent these. So at first, if you've got 0 in any of these, it's a 0. You don't have any bonuses. But then when you put 1 stat into one of these, it becomes a D4, and then it goes to a D6, D7, or D6, D8, D10. And so what you're doing is when you're rolling dice, you're rolling a D20 plus your ability, right? So if you're rolling a might check, you roll ability D10 plus a D6 if you've got a D6 might. So it's really nice. And then in this game, they actually have exploding dice, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I like it because I think that there's more choice here. Sometimes in other systems, I feel like I'm locked into, I have to get this one stat really high. In this one, I felt like there's a lot more choice and a lot more interesting choice here. So I like their attribute list. What else do I like? This also has a miss and you still do damage system, much like 13th Age. But what was cool here was it wasn't just miss and do damage. If you missed, you had the option of, I think, 3 different things. You could either do 3 damage to the target, or you could apply a bane, which we'll talk about banes. In essence, some sort of like debuff on the target, but it had to be like a minor debuff. Or you could do something to like the storyline or something. I forget the last one, but it was nice because it added a little bit more to the system in terms of I've got some choices to make. Even though I missed, I still have some choices. Now, what I don't want to happen with that is I don't want that to slow down the game. So it's got to be quick and easy choices in my brain. The next is the boon and bane system. So what's really amazing about Open Legend is the openness of it. It's well named, and if you have an idea, you can create any kind of character you want. And what that looks like is that they have this laundry list of banes and boons. And these banes and boons are pretty much like abstracted concepts of every mechanic in a typical RPG. So that could be attack buffs, or direct heals, or area heals, or direct damage, or area damage, or touch damage, or what are some ones? Trips, knockdowns, anything. Any of those sort of like what's a normal sort of mechanic breaking down into an abstraction. And what that does is that now you can go through that list and you can create any kind of character you want. You can think of any superhero, any hero you can imagine, and you could say, I want to have a character who is good at, I'm looking at this attribute list, good at learning, or no, here we go, good at logic, and uses their logic to do damage. There's an option for that. You look in the boon, and you would look in the bane list, things that you're doing to an opponent, and you would look at different broken down aspects, and you would see which ones can use logic, and you would figure out what logic then is targeting, in the enemy, like what's their AC or whatever it is they're targeting, and then you would create abilities based on that. So you had a ton of flexibility in terms of creating your character based on these bane and boon lists, and which attributes you wanted to choose from this list. It could be daunting for some people to get their heads around it at first, so I think that character creation, once you've played it a bunch of times, it's super easy to whip up a character, but I think that for new people, understanding the abstraction of banes and boons and combining it with attributes was a little bit much. But for people who have played RPGs and recognize those banes and boons for what they are, it's awesome. It's very smooth, very easy, and a lot of fun. Damaging is number over the AC. This game has a really interesting mechanic that they have exploding dice, meaning that if your dice caps out the highest roll it can, you get to re-roll it and add. So if you have a D8 and you roll an 8, you get to roll another D8 and add that to the 8. And this is exponential. You could do, if you rolled 8, 8, 8, and then a 5, you're going to do 29. That's a 29 on that D8 that you just rolled. And same thing with your D20. If you roll a 20, you're going to re-roll it and you're going to add to it. And so what's cool about this was that there's no damage. You don't roll damage in this game. Instead, you roll your D20 plus whatever your attribute is for your attack. And then what you're doing is you're figuring out what that is and how much of a difference whatever you rolled is from the AC of the enemy. So if I rolled a D20 and I got a 17, and my might is a D10, and I rolled an 8, I rolled a 25, the AC of the enemy was only 15, so I just did 10 damage. Plain and simple. So it's a really smooth little mechanic, but sometimes doing the math on that's a little tricky, especially if your exploding dice keep exploding. So what is really nice about this is we played it, when I played this, we played in Roll20, and it automated all that for me. And so anytime you can have that automation, it makes this system sing even more so. It's really nice in that sense. This is another game that has different ACs. What's nice about this is that these are sort of a combination. So it's like your toughness is whatever your might plus will. I don't know, I'm just making this up, but it's like your guard is your fortitude plus something. And so depending on what stats or attributes you took would then determine what your skills are here. That was the same with, I think, 13th Age. We mentioned it briefly that it had different multiple defenders. It's like your AC was a combination of 2 stats plus what armor you were wearing. Your physical was a combination of 2 different stats you had. Your mental was a combination. So it's a cool system. I like that. I like that there's some, depending on what you're choosing is going to affect that. So I like that. I think that's a nice idea. What does they have? They have weapons. So in this game, I like weapons that have properties, or at least sort of like, properties attached words to them that then have meaning. So this one had forceful, precise, heavy, swift, defensive. I don't know what I'm going to do with those. I just like that they exist. I think that, we'll talk about Pathfinder at some point in time. I really like that Pathfinder has those. So we're going to get to that at some point. I just want to write those words down because I like them. Multi-targeting. So this was an interesting game where advantage, disadvantage, I know that it was in the system before 5e, but 5e really uses it. Advantage and disadvantage is that if I roll 2, if I've got an attack, it's a d20. If I have advantage, I get to roll 2d20, and I take whichever one had the higher roll. So I rolled 2d20, one was a 17, one was a 6. My attack was a 17. Disadvantage would be the opposite. I've got 2d20, I normally attack with a d20, I have disadvantage, I roll 2d20. I now roll those. I got a 17 to 6. I got to take the 6 because I had disadvantage. This game's introduced multiple disadvantages and advantages, meaning you could have disadvantage 2, which means that you then rolled 3d20 and took the lowest, or advantage 2 and rolled 3d20 and took the highest. That got a little crazy. What they did was for multi-targeting. So in this system they had, I believe that their action economy was a standard, minor, and reaction or something like that, and a move, and that your standard action was normally just one attack. But if there were 2 targets, you could attack both. But for each target, you added a disadvantage number. And so in essence it was like, if I've got 2 targets now I'm attacking, I've got disadvantage on both of them. So I can attack both of them, but I've got disadvantage on both of them, as opposed to just attacking one of them normally, right? And if there are 3 targets, I can attack all 3 of them, but I've got disadvantage 3 against, or disadvantage 2 against each of them. So that's a steep penalty. I get that it's a nice little elegant system. I love the idea, because I think this is one of the issues I have in other games, that you, once again, this is pressure luck, risk reward. I like the idea that if I want to be able to attack more people, I can, even if I'm not a specific class. You know, like in 5e, if I'm a fighter and I get to 5th level, I now get 2 attacks. Before I get to 5th level to make 2 attacks, I can't make more attacks unless I have an offhand bonus. I think that you should be able to swing it horribly at multiple people if you want to attempt it, right? So you are swinging a weapon like an idiot maybe, or very, very sloppily, but there's a chance you can hit. So I like that idea. I just don't know if I like how they do it, because that's a pretty steep penalty. But maybe it needs to be that steep. Shouldn't have a wizard who all of a sudden picks up a broadsword and, you know, attacks 3 people and kills them all. So we'll see. Interrupting action. They have these interrupting actions, which is either to defend or improvise. This is pretty cool, because in essence you have an interrupting action, which is kind of like a reaction, but instead of this system also has a reaction, meaning that there is something you can do as a reaction on your turn. But the other thing is that this interrupting action is almost like a thematic action, where something is happening and you decide to either defend a buddy or improvise at the cost that it's going to cost your next standard action, right? So you're going to give up your next standard action, but you're now going to do one of these things. What I really like is how they defend, because defending is that what you do is you're going to roll an attribute check, right, of some sort. Maybe it's attacking, maybe, you know, who knows what it is, but you get to choose sort of an attribute check you're going to roll, and it then replaces the player's AC. So maybe I roll an attack because I'm attacking at their weapon. I don't know. I'd have to look and see what they describe. But say I roll a d20 plus 6, or a d20 and a d6. Say one of those explodes. So now I've got a d20 and I rolled a 6. So I rolled a 15, then I rolled a 6, and then I rolled a 5. So now I just rolled a 27. And so now my buddy, who normally has an AC of 18, all of a sudden goes to 27 because I intercede, and now he doesn't get hit. But I don't have an action turn. So I think that's a really cool concept. I really like that sort of decision. That's the type of decision that I like, in terms of, do I want to help my buddy out? There's a risk involved because I could roll terribly. And there's a risk involved that I'm going to lose my next standard action, but it's a thematic choice that I'm making, or there's a choice that I'm having to make. So anyways, that's my Open Legend talk. I think Open Legend's an amazing system. I think it sings more on, like I said, either Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, because I think that the automation of the exploding dice and the damage being the difference of AC and the dice roll is important. However, caveat, the monsters' dice to multiply and they explode as well. So I can tell you that in this system, I've had buddies that, you know, early levels who've got like 25 hit points and a monster hit them for 30 damage because they got a d20 crit. So they rolled a d20, got a 20, re-rolled a d20, and that person's AC was low, and almost the next thing you know, they've just got obliterated. So great system though, I think it's a lot of fun. The next system I'm gonna talk about is, I think we're gonna talk about Savage Worlds. What does that offer? What do we like about it? What can we do with it that could be fun for an RPG that we're making? All right, so I'll see you next time.